Okay, so hello everyone. This is Marco joining us today. We don't have Roger. I'll just do a brief introduction if people don't know already. Of course, Lula went out of office and Bolsonaro came in, and Bolsonaro's gone, and now Lula's back in. But unfortunately, in combination with parties of the ruling class. So this raises some new challenges and some new things to perspectives to be looked at. So I'm not going to go on anymore. I shall let Marco lead off and what he wants to say. How long would you like to speak for? And I'll give you a nudge when you come in towards the end of the time.
Yes, I can start, and I can control the time here if you allow me, if you let me know when I
It's
have
about
2
20
minutes.
minutes. It's about 20 minutes, okay, and then there'll
20,
be
yes, it's more than enough.
plenty of
Yes.
opportunity for you to come back and clarify things. Right, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So okay, all right. So, good afternoon, good evening, comrades, everyone. Just a quick introduction about myself. I'm Brazilian, as mentioned, and I've been a member from Convergência Socialista and PSTU since the early 90s. I've moved. I'm originally from Rio, then I moved to São Paulo in Brazil, and a bit more than 10 years ago, I moved to the UK. So I'm based in the UK now for quite a long time. But I've been establishing relationship, and I've been a member of one Brazilian group, Resistência, who was a split from PSTU since 2015, 2016, and I left that organization, or I have been left in that organization in November last year. So just to comment, as you mentioned, we currently have the third term of Lula government. So Lula has been president. Lula from is the main political leader from the left already from Brazilian history. And Lula came and he appeared in the struggles, in the working class struggles against the military dictatorship in the late 70s, early 80s. And from that, they created a party. They created PT, a workers' party, together with the trade union central, and so on. And PT has been all along the 1980s being built as the main workers' organization in Brazil. PT had never had the plan or the project to be a revolutionary party or anything even close to that, a reformist party, but it was a struggle party from the working class, from the strikes, organizing strikes, and so on. Uh, throughout the 1990s, it happened a bit similarly what happened in the 90s in the Labour Party in the UK. So they started a shift to the right wing, started to gain a lot of local governments in Brazil, some state governments in Brazil. They've expelled the most of the left-wing organizations, so the organizations that I came from. So Convergência Socialista was one of the founding organizations of PT and has been expelled in the very early 1990s, and then they created PSTU, but others, minor organizations as well. And happened that in the early 2000s, PT got elected, and Lula was president for two terms in sequence. And after Lula 2 terms, in Brazil, one president is allowed to run once again. So the president is allowed to have 2 terms in sequence in a row as a maximum. And he elected another PT representative, as was Dilma Rousseff, as being the president. And she won the re-election campaign, but there was a parliamentary coup organized by the right wing and put her down in 2016. So that was the story. Lula was then imprisoned. The imprisonment, he was sent to prison for corruption charges, even though that most of the left, including PSOL, was in left opposition against the PT government. Pretty much all the left understood that the imprisonment of Lula was actually part of a coup d'etat, and was against it. After that, all the corruption charges have proven to be against him, proven to be wrong, or to be false, actually. And then he ran again the last elections and won the elections against the far-right Bolsonaro. So he's in the third term. And it's important that the way that he won the elections, it was from a very narrow margin against Bolsonaro, uh, and he has built a very broad front, including the main sectors or the main factions of the Brazilian bourgeoisie and even the imperialism supporting against Bolsonaro, because Bolsonaro was a very far-right government. It had served the bourgeoisie for a time, but now they wanted something, a center-left government, a populist front government, to prevent any struggle and to apply their project as they want to be applied, pretty much in line with this new pink tide, as we say in Latin America, with center-left governments in several other countries. It's important as well to say that Bolsonaro's defeat for Lula was the first time in Brazil that an incumbent president running for being re-elected loses the election. So Lula won. Bolsonaro put a lot of status apparatus to win the election. In the last year of his term, he spent a lot of money in several parts, in several investments to gain popularity and to try to boost the economy, to people feel that life was getting better and vote for him, and even minor things. So he put the police in the days of the election. For example, they put the police to stop the transportation in areas where Lula was leading the polls and so on. So, but Lula won the election, and Bolsonaro tried to organize a coup, a military coup or something, to don't allow Lula to take the government. There was an event in the 8th of January of last year of 2023, which was pretty much like the Capitol building situation that Trump supporters did in the US. It was very similar. Bolsonaro supporters were in Brasilia. Bolsonaro supporters stormed a lot of official buildings. It had no police protection. It was on a Sunday. Nobody was in the capital city. And they broke everything. They depredated everything. They put fire in many stuff and so on. Many of them were arrested. And nowadays, as we speak, Bolsonaro is facing prosecution, and Bolsonaro is likely that he'll go to jail. The Supreme Court is charging him of a coup attempt, and is possible. Even the mainstream press analysts, the mainstream media analysts believe that it's possible that he will be sent to prison shortly because of that. And when Lula got in the office again, of course, he had a completely different speech than Bolsonaro. So Bolsonaro, in terms of the Amazon, said, I don't care about the Amazon. I don't care about the native people. I want the economy to grow. Let's put fire on that. Let's build farms on that and so on. Let's extract on that oil and so on. And Lula has a completely different speech, a completely different approach. So it's more, let's defend the Amazon, let's defend the native populations in an international perspective. Oh, let's build peace. Let's against racism, against misogyny, and so on. And it's very different from Bolsonaro. For who don't know Bolsonaro was very much like Trump in his speed, but sometimes even worse, sometimes even more to the far right. And Lula has a completely different speech on that, and that has a huge impact over the vanguard. However, in the substance of the economic policies, and I don't think it will surprise anyone here, is sort of a neoliberal, or as we call in Brazil, a social liberal, which is a neoliberal but with a social and a modern speech policies. So what we have, for example, we have the main rules and the main reforms that were approved by the government were the.
Sorry, I've accidentally muted you, Marco. Can you just unmute yourself? I can't do it from this end. Sorry. I was trying to mute somebody else and I muted you. Sorry
you
about
hear me
that.
now?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
And And so even Lula, with this speech and this more as we call the social liberal speech, completely different from the far right racist, misogynist, and so on. Lula, in the economical terms, is a quite a neoliberal government. So in economical terms, the two main things approved by the government were once was they call in Portuguese the arcabouço fiscal. What it means, in a free translation, will be the fiscal workaround, which is a neoliberal statement that defines and ties all the state budget with cuts, austerity, and so on. And they finally approved the tax bill or the tax reform or the tax bill reform. And this bill reform, this tax reform, was widely praised by the mainstream national in Brazil and international press and analysts. So Financial Times, The Economist, Bloomberg, and so on praised a lot the Lula government and the minister and his economy minister, Fernando Haddad, for managing or for approving these both measures. Just a comment here, a funny comment for who doesn't know Haddad. Haddad is a guy from PT. He's one of the most neoliberal people in the government right now. But Haddad, until few days before the government inauguration, Haddad was the representative in Brazil of the Progressist International, the international network ran by Janusz Varoufakis. This guy, he's not anymore, but his guy was in Brazil the main representative of the Progressive International, and is one of the most neoliberal representatives in the PT government. And there's a lot of them. The vice president, Geraldo Alckmin, used to be the main bourgeois politician during all the 2000, the first decade of the 2000 years. He ran against Lula as a president more than once, and he's the vice president now. So, and Haddad is one of the most right wings. And also there are other attacks in the indigenous people that, okay, Lula says not with him, but the parliament approves, and he doesn't clash with the parliament accordingly because he said, oh, I don't have the needed strength to do that, and so on and so on. With that, we also have a left-wing party that should be an independent party called PSOL. The majority of the left organizations and many of the Trotskyist organizations work within PSOL, inside PSOL in Brazil. And PSOL is not exactly a new left formation. It's not very new. Has many years. PSOL appeared in the first years of the first PT governments against neoliberal reforms implemented by Lula, by PT government, and some people were expelled from PT and created PSOL, created this organization. But now PSOL is, for the first time on its history again, PSOL is shifting to support government and to the center left, in a way it hadn't done before. So in the elections, PSOL was the first national election since PSOL foundation that PSOL did not launch a candidate, even in the first round, to support Lula. And there was a fierce debate in the first round if PSOL would have to launch a candidate, even to withdraw the candidate if the case, or to support Lula only in the second round in the runoff against Bolsonaro. But PSOL did not even launch a candidate. I believe that PSOL, my personal opinion, that PSOL should have launched a candidate to put the agenda, the anti-capitalist agenda, and so on. And at the end, as Lula was very close to win in the first round and to defeat Bolsonaro, it could withdraw the candidacy, but they didn't do that. More than that, PSOL joined the very broad alliance. So PSOL formally not only called the vote for Lula, that would be fine, but joined the very broad alliance were included many of the main parties of even from the Brazilian bourgeoisie. And now, after the election, PSOL is part of the government. So PSOL has one minister in the government. PSOL has several high-rank members in many ministries, many secretaries, very high rank in the government. And in Brazil, part of the government, they have the governed bloc in the parliament. So the bloc of MPs or Congress people in the parliament who support formally support of the government. And PSOL not only is part of that bloc with other bourgeois parties, but PSOL has the deputy leader of that bloc as well. And that's not the only problem. PSOL also voted for the tax bill reforms and the fiscal workaround, as I mentioned. And it's nice to say PSOL currently has now a fierce struggle within PSOL. We have two blocks in PSOL. There's the majority of PSOL, and they have one local mayor for one state capital, and the majority of PSOL, they support the government, they are in the government, they vote for the government, for the government policies like these ones I described. And there's the left wing of PSOL. The left bloc in PSOL is around 35%, roughly, according to the last conference, 35% of PSOL, which advocates for an independent PSOL, an anti-capitalist PSOL, and so on. For the vote in the tax bill reform, for example, PSOL has 12 MPs, and 3 MPs, the 3 representatives of the left bloc in PSOL, they did not vote. And they were openly criticized by the majority of PSOL for not having that. But they did not, they said, we cannot vote for that. And they did not vote for the tax bill, for example. Now, we have in Brazil local elections, very important local elections later this year, in October this year. And these local elections in Brazil, they work like, it's not exactly formally like that, but they work like midterm elections. So they are local elections for mayors and council members, but for all the cities, including the main cities. And there's a way that, okay, that we see how is the government and in an electoral point of view, in an electoral perspective, how is the government and the forces in the society. And PSOL, unfortunately, is deepening the trend that I described before. The main city in São Paulo, in Brazil, as you probably know, is São Paulo. And in São Paulo, the candidate supported by the government and endorsed by the Lula government is the PSOL candidate, Boulos. So PSOL has the candidate of the broad alliance, of the government broad alliance in the main city, in the most important city of the country. Not only that, the agenda, the profile, and the alliances that are being built in this candidacy are very much going to the right, not to the far right, of course, but to the center left or to the center ground. I don't know if you had the chance to read. There's an article in the International Standpoint talking about that. So the candidate of vice mayor in the PSOL slate is a lady called Marta. And this lady, she was from PT, but a long time ago. This lady supported the parliamentary coup. This lady, when she was São Paulo mayor a long time ago, she clashed with several workers' unions, strikes, and so on in the education. She promoted austerity cuts and so on. And PSOL is running against the incumbent mayor, this former center-right party. Until the first week of January, 1 week before she was announced as the vice mayor candidate together with PSOL, she was part of that. She was part of the mayor team in São Paulo. So she was part, and she had a high-ranked secretary role in São Paulo, and now she moved. Oh no! Now I'm going to run as vice mayor from the opposition. So to see how far and how disconnected from a left-wing, independent, anti-capitalist perspective PSOL candidacies are moving on. In terms of the social networks, and that's very important as well, because when we analyze a situation in a country, we do not only see the upper and the structure and the upper structure and electoral and so on movements. These are important, but it's important to see as well what's going on at the ground level. So trade unions and movements. We don't see a lot of struggles at the moment, and fundamentally because it's a popular front government and the main trade unions and the main leaderships trust and support the government. They keep quiet, even with the attacks that's going on. When someone tries to criticize, they say, oh, be careful. Do you want the far right back? Do you want Bolsonaro back? This is what we have. So let's be happy with that. That's what we have. That's what's possible for today. And to finish, I believe that this also brings again, everything of this brings again a question which is not new in the Marxist Trotskyist perspective. The question is, how do we deal with the growth of the far right? To deal with the growth of the far right, do we downgrade our profile? Do we mix together in very broad alliances? We support very broad governments, established governments with sectors of the bourgeoisie, giving to the far right all the credentials and giving to the far right all the political space to claim that they are the anti-establishment, and they get all the disillusion and the despair caused by austerity, by cuts, and so on? Or do we may have some points of unified action sometimes against a coup, against a far-right initiative, and so on. But we, as a left, remain independent without class coalition, without class collaboration, remain independent with our own program, with our own agenda, with our own profile, and present. We are the anti-establishment. We, the left, the socialist left, we are the response that you need from the despair, from the disillusion, from the authority. It's us, not the far right. And this question is not new, right? This question was present in the 1930s, in the 1940s. This question was on the foundation, was on one of the foundational pillars of Trotskyism against the reformists and the Stalinists. And it's very vivid again, not only in Brazil, but worldwide, I believe. So I believe that my time is gone, right? I think that was a quick introduction. Of course, it was very brief and was very high level about what's going on in Brazil. But happy to answer questions and to carry on this conversation as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. Very nicely done in the time. But of course, there'll be people asking questions. You will be able to come back. So I'll throw it on to the floor now. Who would like to put your electronic hand up if you want to ask a question or make a comment? Vin.
Yeah, comrades, that's an interesting opening contribution. I want to ask a question about the Workers' Party. Firstly, is there a widespread disillusionment with the party and government? Are people leaving the Workers' Party? Is the potential vote for the Workers' Party in the coming election going to be significantly down? The reason I'm asking it is because this is a phenomenon that extends to many countries. The UK is one, but the same is true amongst the socialist parties in France and other countries and Germany. So I'm interested in the effect of the policies being pursued by Lula on the membership of the party. Are people leaving? And also, is there the growth of a left opposition within the Workers' Party that might eventually become a majority against Lula's policies? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Finn. I suggest we just take the comments that are available. Take the contributions first, and if there's a pause, we'll come back to Marco and he can answer those questions. David.
Look, thanks, comrade, for that introduction. My question is one which relates to the reforms in the first period that the Workers' Party came to power. And I'm sorry that we don't have more of the people that we had in discussion before, who are generally young people who went to university for the first time. They were the first generation from their families that would be into the university. And they were very proud and very loyal to the PT, even though we argued and presented other cases, because they felt that this was the one party which had actually brought them, had opened the doors of learning to them, and they remained let's say, in loyal internal opposition rather than going to PSOL or somewhere else. I wondered if you could reflect just on what the mental legacy or the political legacy is among the youth as much as the workers. And then the other question I have is that I imagine that with the changes in technology, the motor industry and so forth used to be a basis for the Workers' Party. I'm not sure, what's happening now in relation to the growth of manufacturing, particularly in the metal sector. That was a very powerful sector which propelled the Workers' Party forward and was an inspiration to the workers in South Africa, who were really inspired by the huge growth, in the union, the metal union, and it inspired the same in South Africa. So, look, I've got those questions. If I could later come in on some other points.
Okay, thanks, David. There's no hands up at the moment, so do you want to reply to that, Marco?
Can I also
Nikos, sorry, yes,
questions, Pam, before?
Sorry?
Yeah, sorry.
You're breaking up a bit.
Yeah, can I ask some questions?
Yes, sure. Yeah, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'll close my camera because my connection is not good. Okay, I just want to ask you, Marcio, about if you can say a bit more about the state of consciousness towards the Pete government. So is it, people are kind of like still relieved? Is there a period where, they think they'll give PT one more chance? How do people see the new government? If he has a, like an idea of the consciousness around that. And my second question would be about the situation in the rest of the left. So from what I know, like the PSTU, if I remember correctly, has considerable forces. So it's a party to the left of PSOL, so to speak. What is the situation of the left outside PSOL, and is there a relation between the developments inside PSOL with the rest of the left? Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thanks, Nikos. Anybody else at this moment, or should we return to speaker? No? Okay, Marco, do you want to reply to all that?
Okay, so let me start from one David's question that I think that is fundamental, is crucial, and I didn't include in my initial report. Is what are the economic basis and what happened in the first Lula's government, and also after that in the Dilma's government. Yes, so in the first Lula's governments, Lula navigated what we call the commodities boom. So there was a huge commodities boom in the very early 2000s that lasted until a bit after the 2008 crisis. And Brazil economy was based in mining, based in oil, oil and gas, was based in some types of manufacturing that helped Brazil to navigate together with other countries, together with India and China and others that navigated a lot in that perspective. So there was a huge economical growth in Brazil in that short period. But I wouldn't say that Lula promoted reforms. I say that Lula got that money and got that momentum, and he could. And of course, he was different from the previous government. We are talking about a social democratic government, a PT government, and not the very traditional bourgeois governments that Brazil had before. So we started a lot of policies in terms of that allowed a level of inclusion. So investments in universities, credit for the people, the increasing the private spending and the private debts of the population. But of course, it was something that Brazil had never seen. What was the problem? And what was the part after that? So for that part was very, the perception that people had about PT was very good. So this is the reason that Lula was re-elected very easily, and was quite easy for PT to, after Lula's second term, to elect his successor, Dilma Rousseff. it was quite easily, very easily to be done. Lula won the second election by a landslide against Alckmin, who happened to be his vice president now, and all the bourgeoisie supporting Alckmin and so on. The problem is what happened after that, because when the crisis came, when the world crisis came in 2008, and in Brazil and in these cause of the coupled countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and so on, the crisis came a bit later. When the crisis came, the response that PT had was huge austerity. So the second term of Dilma, the first term of Dilma Rousseff government was already a very austerity government. So many of the conquest, not the conquest, but many of the benefits and the developments that the working class and the people had in the years before disappeared quite rapidly. And with that, we had the events in June 2013. It was public upheavals, social upheavals, pretty much everywhere in Brazil. It was for sure the biggest and the deepest upheavals process in Brazilian history. I wrote an article to the Internationalist Standpoint as well, talking about the commemoration of the 10 years of that process of June 2013, but we explain a bit more what happened, the government responses and so on. But it was because the population, and especially the youth, perceived that, oh, we are paying for the bill of everything. Now that situation that we had before doesn't exist anymore, and we are moving backwards, and moving backwards very rapidly. We are impoverishing very rapidly. We have no schools, we have no health, public health, we have nothing. And that situation happened. So, yes, answering your question, yes, for the very first governments, for the beginning of the PT government, and no for the second time of the PT government. And that disillusion, which helped that disillusion which created the basis for the right wing and the far right capitalize disillusion, and after that in 2016 started the right wing's mobilization and the parliamentary coup and so on. When we called, even the left called the people to go to the streets to defend PT governments against the coup, and it was correct to do that, even if you were left opposition to the government, but to defend the government against the coup, the youth and the large sectors of the working class simply did not go. And that happened. And now coming to the Finn's questions about the disillusion. Okay, what are the disillusion that we have now? And also responding as well the Nico's question about the state of consciousness. To see and to respond on how that is now, we must come back a few years later how it was in the Bolsonaro government. Bolsonaro government, it was started to appear. After the coup, we have a deepening in the austerity, so in the cuts, all the austerity cuts, and so on. And it unsurprisingly created recession and attacked directly the working class and the poor people. So and after that, we have on top of that, the pandemic came. So the situation, the social situation, the economical situation in the Bolsonaro government was very bad, So what happened is that people hated Bolsonaro. So the state of consciousness, I would say that now is okay. PT is not perfect. PT government is not good. But if we lose it, the alternative to that is Bolsonaro. According to the polls, Lula has, and in terms of approval ratings, it still has a majority of approval rating. I would say 55% or something like that. But it doesn't have 90% or 85% as he had in the early 2000s. That's not the case nowadays, definitely is different. So the state of consciousness and the opportunist groups in the PSOL, in my opinion, Nikos, they rely on that, they are based on that. The state of consciousness is fear. Okay, this government may not be very good, but it's what we have for today, right? If it's not that, be careful, because Bolsonaro and the far right are just down the road waiting for the first opportunity to come back. So we need to be behind this government and support this government and pray for this government works very well, because the alternative to that is the far right. That would be the state of conscience and so on. In terms of left, PT membership, the membership in the parties in Brazil, especially these mainstream parties as PT, I wouldn't say that is a very good index to measure the party. It's more electoral maybe than the party's allegiance. People don't affiliate to party very commonly there unless they want to run for something, or they are affiliated by the local local authorities for some parties and event. For example, PSOL is a very small party, but PSOL runs Belém. Belém is the capital city of Pará state. Pará state is a state in the north of Brazil. It's not economically, it's not among the most important ones, but it's a big state in the north of Brazil. And the mayor of the capital city is from PSOL. He's facing strikes, all that situation. And the point is, for the PSOL conference, they affiliated a lot of people who has no relationship to politics at all, are not social leaders, social activists, nothing like that. They just affiliated a lot of people there to be able to have more delegates to the national conference of PSOL. And they used the city apparatus, the state apparatus for doing that. So that's not a very good, but I would say that the PT is still the number one party. If you go to the people to the left, or the progressive people, left-wing people, not activists, not militants, and ask what's the main political party in Brazil, most of them for sure are going to say PT. PT has a left inside of it, but it's very, I would say, the most of the PT left, real left, they left PT a long time ago. Even they are in PSOL, they are in other organizations. I don't see the left opposition within PT as a power which is having the strength capable to change the turns, to change the tides on PT, or not even close to that. It's not even close to the Labour Party. The comparison with the Labour Party is a bit different, and I've been to the Labour Party here, so I learned and I tried to get in to enter and to actuate there with that comparison. Is completely different. The left, there's no space for the left opposition in PT. In terms of the left, coming to Nico's question again about the rest of the left outside PSOL, I believe is very small, and is very, as we say, is very unrepresentative. We have PSTU, which is small. We have some Stalinist organizations that are very small as well, even if they are important. And unfortunately, the left bloc in PSOL, in the previous conference, not this one, but the one before that, the left bloc was around 45% of PSOL. 45% of PSOL was the left, 45% of PSOL was the right, and the remaining 10% of PSOL was the center group, was the Resistência. Unfortunately, the group I was part of, unfortunately got in, and with 10% moved and voted everything to the right. But a part of this left of PSOL decided, in my opinion, it was a mistake, but decided to leave PSOL when PSOL joined the government. Instead of struggling and having the struggle within PSOL, they left PSOL. But they are not capable at the moment, and they did not build an alternative that could be a left alternative even to PSOL. I think that the struggle and this reorganization in Brazil still passes in the struggle within PSOL for PSOL being an independent organization. And the last question that I noticed here was one question from David about how are the metal workers and what are the main sectors of workers that are in struggle. And that's important as well. And I think we need to understand a shift that's currently going on in Brazilian economy. Also during the boom that, and we are talking about 2005, 2006, we had the metal workers and we had the metal sectors, even expanding the metal sectors to other states, not only in São Paulo state, but in Rio de Janeiro state, we had a lot, but we had other industries growing and investing a lot as well, with a lot of workers. First of all, the main sector was the oil workers from Petrobras, but the oil workers, and they had very important struggles. The mining workers from Vale and other manufacturing workers, not only for metal, but from steel company workers. So we had that a lot. That I would say that's a step back on that, not only in the struggles, but in the industry. We saw a huge recession after the crisis, and a lot of those industries simply, especially in Rio de Janeiro, the state at that time original, they simply shut down. So Rio de Janeiro economically is in a very bad position because most of its industries in the last 10 years, they simply shut down. So people were unemployed, people impoverished, and so on. And now the gravity center of Brazilian economy, and that was a policy of Bolsonaro, inclusive, was to shift to the agribusiness. So it's less. So Brazil should be, according to them, Brazil should be an exporter of commodities such as soy, such as meat, and these type of products instead of manufactured products. And this has been the most dynamic sector in the Brazilian industry, and the workers' organization in that sector is very, very weak. They have no tradition, they have no organization, they have no and geographically it is not even located in the main cities. Geographically is more located in the countryside of Brazil, in the central west of Brazil, not very much in urban areas and so on. So that's not defined yet. So it's still a process that is still going on. But I see that tendency, and that tendency was encouraged and was boosted in the Bolsonaro and Temer, the coup president before, and they changed a bit the Brazilian economical landscape as I noticed. I don't know if I missed any questions, or I didn't answer properly any of the questions. Please let me know.
Okay, thanks, Marco. People can come back in if they want any clarification or any other questions. Well, Eric has his hand up now.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm curious, it's perhaps a little off topic, and that'd be fair if that's what you wanted to say, because it's its own topic. But I wonder, there were all the I don't exactly know how to frame them. The uprisings that started around police brutality here in the United States, that took on this racial character, an anti-colonial character, which is complex. And I've been to Brazil just once. I was only there a few weeks, but in some regards, it reminded me of the U.S. And the histories are different. We're both colonial countries. Racism was much sharper in the United States. But I wonder if, I'm trying to sum up the question here, you could say a little something about how this recent arrival of this new, how we're going to call this kind of postmodern identity politics, which has made the political landscape here different, is what I'll say. It's a little more challenging in some ways. I wonder how that's come up in Brazil. There's that whole, the idea of Brazil being a racial democracy in air quotes, but we know that the class stratification is highly racialized. And I wonder how that's entered into the last 15, 20 years with the PT government and the Bolsonaro government. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. David? You want to come back in, yeah?
Yeah, look, I wanted to make some points. I didn't really want to deflect from Eric's question, but let me just make some points, and maybe these help in widening the discussion. First of all, our perspectives are built up by seeing patterns internationally of politics. The development of major reformist movements at times. In a sense, what's happened in Brazil has followed, the huge left movements which happened in Europe in the 1970s. I know we always want to and have to deal with the particular and the concrete, but we must also look to see the broader patterns which are going on, and particularly the very interesting pattern of what you mentioned as left centrist governments in Latin America. Not that much has changed, but at least it's some complexion of what they call the pink tide or something of that kind, which responds to the English don't like this word popular, the popular mood or something, which sometimes the popular can be very reactionary. But this time it's actually moving in a left direction. And then the extraordinary similarities, which Eric touched on in the broadest sense, but actually in the concrete types of right-wing politics. I mean, Trumpism is an international phenomenon, which is a sense of the bourgeois wriggling to be free from a kind of ruling class restraint, which is intelligent, long-term perspective, and rather to go to extremes to crush the left, or attempt to crush the left by using what are very cheap electoral politics, so that in America, it's although I've never heard people personally mentioning the hatred for foreigners in America, as I have in South Africa, which is very common in South Africa, Trump is found that strand of hatred, and he's blowing on that fire all the time. Even though and in a sense, then using every cheap trick of politics and creating a momentum which at times looks unstoppable because it's based on real trends. In other words, that America has 10,000 illegal, so-called, I don't want to use that term, but anyway, migrants that are on the border, including even Chinese workers and so forth. And so therefore it's something which the bourgeois can't deal with administratively, and so he wants to worsen that problem and create a tide of resentment. Now, the marvelous thing in Brazil is that tide it seems to have been stopped, at least for a while. I'm sure that the embers are still there, but for some reason, Lula's return has somewhat dampened that down, which makes a kind of common sense politics of the left center that, for God's sake, hold on to what you've got because it could be a hell of a lot worse. Now, I know that we don't follow, our politics is not common sense in the sense we're trying to base ourselves on scientific methods. But I can see how we get trapped into the, in that, or I wouldn't say trapped, but have to take that into consideration, because actually it's definitely better than rampaging right-wing movements which tend towards fascism and to return to a point that Eric's made, the most brutal class politics and racial politics, especially in the favelas and so forth in the recent past. I don't know if it's eased a bit, but where, the police used to boast of how many kids that they'd killed the night before. Unbelievable misery, there. Then the other points I want to make are in the relation to reforms. If we had power, what would be the first priority? What happened with Lula? In a way, it was quite astonishing from a South African perspective, because he did actually carry out reforms immediately. The ANC, African National Congress, when it came to power in South Africa, carried out one reform. That one reform was to get rid of the white people in the civil service and put black people in, and put them into key positions in government. Apart from that, the universities were not open. There was no funding for black students to enter the universities. There was no anti-poverty program, et cetera, et cetera. And Brazil actually led enormously, in comparison with a very weak social basis of reform in South Africa. So we saw that. But what I learned from watching this movie called The Edge of Democracy, I'm sure you would know it, but it's a kind of documentary which is very insightful, because the cameramen had privileged access to the top people during the time of the counter-revolution and the parliamentary coup and so forth. And you could see that actually the lefts there, Lula and the others, were actually had no sense of how to fight politics. Lula just gave up when he was interrogated by the prosecutor. He just fumbled. You see, against the kind of Trump thing, which just says this is a witch hunt, and just keep repeating that and just fighting back. The left looked like soggies. They didn't. There was no fighting, and most importantly, it looked like. What happened, even though when they came to power, I don't think they had a single national newspaper or even a regional newspaper that supported the PT. I mean, they actually had no media, no social communication as a basis. Maybe they had it on TV, but actually, in terms of propaganda, in terms of the flow of information, there was absolutely nothing. And the right wing took to the social media to amplify the divisions, splits and divisions, and to create, build a radical right wing, which is based on simple a slash and burn. And when it comes to the forests and to the Amazon, grab what you can, get the gold, get rich quick as possible. If you kill people on the way, that's what. If you destroy the environment so much, it's Trumpism of a particular kind. But there were certain opportunities for growth. I mean, I was in a responsible position in South Africa in one of our state-owned enterprises, and I tried to get us to break with Windows and to go the Brazilian way, which was actually to have an alternative public software which was available. So there, if we did fight against, the world markets, there actually is a basis for it. And imagine Microsoft makes absolute billions from us, almost as a public utility, siphoning off money from us in an astonishing way. And yet reformism had no basis for building on that, the possibilities of, let's say, of new types of enterprises. But look, let me just conclude and say that, we are all very interested to see the rebuilding of the left. We understand the particular conjuncture in Brazil, but it has, I think, led to something further. It has helped consolidate, whether that's good or bad, the center-left government. So at least it's what can I say? It's blunted the edge of the ultra-right, it seems to me. I mean, just come back on that. I'd be interested to see how the general mood in Latin America is right now. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, David. Anybody else before we go back for a response from Marcio? No? Okay. Should we come back to you then, Marcio?
Okay, so let me start answering something to Eric. Eric, Brazil is a very, very racist country. I wouldn't say there's more racist or less racist than the US. The racism is a bit different. Apart from a lot of similarities, cultural similarities that you've pointed out and exist between Brazil and the US, there are differences, and one of the differences is how the racism expressed. So Brazil is a very, very racist country as well, but sometimes this racism is subtle, is hidden, or is disguised as any other things. We had in 2013, as I mentioned, a huge. The biggest upheaval in Brazilian history. And it wasn't because of racial things directly, but was sparked by repression against the youngs, against students, complaining about the rise of the bus tickets in São Paulo, in the capital city. But it happened again. I would say these oppressed struggles in the US in 2020 was that situation of that sparkled the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and so on. In Brazil, we didn't have that exactly, but in Brazil, for example, is very strong the women's movement, And I would say that the main opposition in the streets in terms of social movement against Bolsonaro was the feminist movement, because Bolsonaro tried to attack women's rights in several different ways. In Brazil, abortion is not allowed, just in very few cases, and Bolsonaro tried to reduce even those very few cases. And there were a lot of struggles against Bolsonaro, and even electorally, and certainly because of that, Bolsonaro lost the election mainly because of the women population. And if you see the polls and the figures of the polls in terms of Lula and Bolsonaro and the difference in women, the Lula's difference in favor of Lula is gigantic compared to the other side. So there is that in Brazil as well. And I would say more. I would say, as there is in probably in the US, but in many other countries, in Britain as well, there's a pressure for a postmodern approach of these oppressed struggles, the racial struggles, the immigrant struggle. Immigrants in Brazil is not pretty much a topic, but the immigrant struggle, the racial, the feminist struggle, the environment struggle is how do you face that? I believe that it's important to intervene in those struggles and to be part of those struggles because they are progressive struggles. So we need to be in the climate struggles, in the women's struggles, in the minority ethnic struggles. But we need also to bring the class agenda to that, to connect that struggle to the class struggle and to the class policies. And that's a very fierce debate within Brazilian left, even within PSOL now. How do we combine, or if we have to combine the class approach to these struggles, or the identity struggles need to be done by itself? That happens in Brazil as well, with the racial, with the women's struggles, with the environmental struggles, and others as well. David mentioned something very important in terms of pattern. So in terms of pattern and the far right and the peak tide, if we see what happened in Latin America, unfortunately not in Brazil, but in Latin America, we had this pink tide, but we had a chain of events of social upheaval and struggles and even insurrections, if we may say, in several countries of Latin America that defeated in a way the right-wing governments that they had there. If we go to the time of the first PT, the two initial PT governments in Brazil, we had a lot of center-left, let's say, governments in Latin America. We had Chavez in Venezuela, we had Evo Morales in Bolivia, we had Lula and PT in Brazil, we have left-wing governments pretty much everywhere. The Socialist Party, that is very center-left government in Chile, but and so on, it was there. Then we had a sequence of coups, different types of coups or right-wing victories in Latin America, except for Venezuela that kept Chavez and kept Maduro, but they tried. But even in other countries, we had coups. We had Evo Morales got in prison, got arrested. We had coup in Peru. We had the right-wing in Chile. We had right-wing in Argentina. We had Bolsonaro and Temer in Brazil and so on. And we had a lot of struggles in the early 2020s in Latin America. We had the Chilean, I would say, and the group that I used to talk with, we use it to define the Chilean process as a semi-insurrection, that the estallido in Chile that we had. We had in Colombia a very powerful upheaval as well. We have the upheavals in Ecuador, upheavals in Peru, huge mobilizations in manifestations and demos in Argentina, and strikes, general strikes in Argentina. Brazil was quite quiet. Brazil didn't have that level of mobilization, but and that, what I believe, that was the reason that the imperialism changed the mind and changed the policy to Latin America. Say, look, this is not going to work. These very right-wing governments governments are unsustainable. They will create a much more radicalized solution. Let's go back to the solution of support center-left governments with nice speeches, with speeches not as radical as the previous ones. But yes, in the end, that in the economic sense, they will apply the cuts, they will apply the austerity, they will apply the fiscal changes and the fiscal policies that we want them to have. That happened together with the change in the US as well. We are talking about when the struggles that Eric mentioned here that ended to helping to defeat Trump. Had defeat Trump, and now we had a new government in the US, Biden, Anthony Blinken, a new policy for Latin America. And I think that's the pattern that describes and explains why these Latin America governments are going into that direction. We had a change now, and the situation in Argentina is very important to be followed up. Not only the Milei government, but the left response and the working class response to the Milei government in Argentina. That's a very important topic. And I believe that we had in Argentina General Milei was inaugurated. He's in office for 2 months, a bit more than 2 months, or less than 2 months, I think, about 2 months roughly. And he faced one huge general strike in the country, and his 100 points main policy that he put in the Congress, he had to withdraw because it could not be approved. It was approved, but then after he suffered a huge defeat in the parliament, pressured by the streets, pressured by the general strike, and the situation there is very interesting. But I agree that Brazilian situation must always be analyzed. Of course, we need to see the specific aspects, but must be analyzed within this wider perspective, these wider patterns, and that's the point. Bolsonaro, for example, he's very racist as well, and he expressed that in quite some times, even when he was president in his campaign and so on. And to finalize, and who supported Lula? Yes, you were right, David. In the very end, and that film is very good that you mentioned from a Brazilian director, that she's very close to PT, Petra Costa. But that film reflects the very last days. In the very last days of Dilma were exactly that. All the mainstream media, all the mainstream bourgeois organizations were against her and were working for a coup against her. That's correct. And what's the point? Where was the army of the working class army that should support Lula? Was not there? Was the left just seeing what was going on, incapable of mobilizing the people that we were capable before? Because the PT Lula, from these 16 PT Lula or PT stood in government for 30 years in sequence, for 13 years in sequence. Most of them, PT, they mobilized the working class, and those same sectors that were not supporting PT, that were against PT, the global and the mainstream media, the mainstream newspaper, the mainstream bourgeois politicians, and so on, they just changed the side. They just changed the side, and they were pro-Lula, they supported Lula, and Lula relied on them, and they were against Lula. And guess what? Guess whom they are supporting now? And Lula is again counting on their support. So now those same television groups, those very same ones, they support Lula. The same Supreme Court, with the same Minister of Supreme Court that declared that Lula was corrupt and put him in prison. The same ones changed their mind a few years later. Oh, we were wrong about Lula. Put him out of the prison, allow him to run. He ran, he won the election, and now they are prosecuting and wanting to put in jail Bolsonaro. So the bourgeoisie and the imperialism, they have their policy and they shift according to what's more interesting. And on that day, okay, for today, what's better for me is to go to the center left, is to go to the far right, is to go to the center right, and I manipulate everything according to that. One of the problems of Lula, of the PT, is okay, they are happy because they do everything they want, everything they can to have the support of those sectors. But in the day that they are no longer useful for those sectors and those mainstream media and parties are going to do the same as they did a few years ago. So that's one point that we are stressing a lot about these broad alliances that PT. The easiest way to come back, all of us, we hate the far right. There's not only here, but I think in the world, any left-wing person, reasonable person, hates the far right, Trumpism, and all that speech and so on. The question is, how do we prevent the far right to returning? and is not being completely collaborating, is not being completely associated to the mainstream, because the far right exists, and we all know that here, of course. But unfortunately, a lot of Trotskyist organizations, I seem that, including the one I've been part of a good chunk of my life, seems they have forgotten that. But no, the way to support, the way to defeat the far right and to prevent the far right is no, we are the response. We are the anti-establishment response. The socialist the socialist perspective is the response to the anti-establishment, and that's, I believe, what's on the table, in not only in Brazil but in Latin America. But that's what these are the stakes worldwide today.
Okay, thank you. We move on to Nigel.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that, confronting the far right, being from England. And I say England, actually, because I've been looking at the data on this, which refers to England and Wales rather than the rest of the United Kingdom. And attitude and racist attitudes in England and Wales have reduced considerably over time. So if you go back to the 1970s and 1980s, there's been a huge shift in attitudes away from racist attitudes. Overt racism is relatively hard to see in this country, except from the establishment. We're still institutionally racist, and our political parties are institutionally racist. But we have made progress in terms of consciousness amongst the people, in terms of race. That isn't to say that the issues around migration and those kind of things aren't pumped up in the press and used as a way of otherizing people coming to this country for the first time. But still underneath that, if you look at a whole swathe of different evidence bases, which I've done, you find evidence, a lot of evidence to support an improving attitude towards race. Brexit, for example, was supposed to be a trigger for increasing racism, increasing the strength of the far right, and it didn't do that. The data shows it had a very temporary effect. Various terrorist attacks that happened in the UK had as much effect, but again, temporary effect. Obviously, I don't want to go on at this at tremendous length. I just want to make that basic point. Now, that isn't necessarily a popular point to put across on the left, because, you know, organizations like the SWP, for example, you know, want to emphasize the racist divisions within our culture and a society. But I'm interested that there's been progress made there. Now, the answers to that, I think, having been in the movement for a long time, left organizations back in the 70s and 80s were very big. And the far right was confronted on the streets. The left could do that. It was big enough to do that and mobilize in order to do that. So that's where the confrontations took place. But then I think there was also a cultural change, and I'll use this one example in schools. There was a period in the 70s when teaching became liberalized and schools became quite liberalized places. That's changed now. But there was a period when there was a culture of accepting difference, let's put it that way. And teachers, I think, leading the way with that, actually, to some extent. And also trade unions. Trade unions having, you know, very clear policies around racism and those kind of forms of prejudice, and you know, discouraging that in the workplace. And it might sound naive to say that, but I think that had quite an impact, actually, in workplaces. And at least formally, the Labour government, even though it's institutionally racist in my view, did introduce policies that were helpful towards that. So let's put it that way. And there was a wish and a feel to move away from Thatcherism and the ideas that Thatcher represented. So what I'm basically saying is that was unity on the left. That was confronting racism on the streets, but it was also in our workplaces and institutions confronting them too, which I think led to some progress. Now, the fear we have is that unraveling with a clear racist position taken by Starmer on Palestine and the problems that is causing, because it's very hard to win gains around issues like this, but it's very easy to lose them, and you can lose them very quick. I'll use one example. I mentioned it before in a meeting before, Marcio, but I'll mention it again. The trans issue in this country has unraveled really quickly, and anti-trans feeling has accelerated really fast from very low levels of anti-trans feelings to quite high levels of anti-trans feelings in the UK, because what's happened is groups on the left have got confused over the matter and have started arguing amongst themselves. So there's that issue, and when the Labour Party, which is representing a lot of ordinary people still, gets confused over racism, which it is at the moment, then that is also a danger. And Starmer taking us towards, I think, right-wing, quite a right-wing neoliberal government is a real threat to that. So the fight is still on, and the gains that have been made have to be fought for and continued in similar methods. But it was fighting that fight in the workplaces and fighting that fight on the streets, I think, more than anywhere else. It wasn't it was those places where I think the progress was made.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Nigel. Nikos.
Yeah, comrades. I want to touch on a point which was mentioned by also Marcio, but also David, on how to actually deal with the far right, because the rise of the far right is one of the most important trends in politics at this moment. It's a worldwide trend, and it actually changes and it brings up front a discussion inside the left on how to deal with that. And I mean, Brazil is a very clear case, since Bolsonaro is not like what we would call a mainstream far right politician. It has links with paramilitary groups, with the army. It's from what I understand, his sons actually gave the order for the murder of Marielle Franco, a PSOL activist, or they were involved in the case. So and also his supporters were engaged in actual in violence in the streets. So it's not like a mainstream far right party. And of course, this naturally brings forward a discussion on how to deal with that. But then in this discussion, I think there are flawed positions inside the left on that, and we had that discussion in Greece also on how to deal with Golden Dawn, because there's a natural feeling, if you will, of people that say, we need the broadest front against the fascists in order to deal with them. And naturally, working class people may feel that if the bourgeois layers want to get in that front, that would be good. But then the problem comes is that if you do a front against the far right or the fascists with bourgeois politicians, then the question comes to mind to a lot of people, then what do you represent against the far right? And if you are seen to represent mainstream politics, if you are seen to represent anti-working class politics, which these parties, the center left parties represent, then the so-called anti-fascist front is discredited. It's a kind of like there's a policy in some parts of the left which leans towards more. So you have like a trend towards the far right, and they lean towards more moderate policies, more moderate towards the establishment. But that is a very big flaw. And, like Marcio also mentioned, the discussion around, what happened in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, which was exactly that. If the forces of the left are identified with mainstream politics, they actually undermine the basis of the anti-fascist front. And I think it's important to understand is that there is a reason why working class people are attracted to far-right radicalism. And the main reason, in my view, is not the far-right part of far-right radicalism, it's the radicalism part. It's the fact that the far-right in many countries it is presented as the only radical force that can change things. And that is what attracts, working class people. I don't say that there are not, like clearly case of racists which would be attracted to any far-right formation, but we're discussing now about this fact. So coming to Brazil, I think the idea that, as I understand, has gained the dominance in PSOL, that we need to make a front with Lula, even though he's moving towards the right and he is actually in a deal with the main bourgeois forces in the country, in order to fight off Bolsonaro, is actually going to have the exact opposite effect. And that would actually destroy one of the most important formations of the new left, which is PSOL. I know in this part of the world, PSOL was seen, as an example. People were looking towards it, and now it's getting more and more the same story. The left, which actually enters the mainstream politics, and it becomes, like one of the same. So I think it's important for us to discuss these lessons and take this thing out, because it will be a feature in I think most countries, and the experience of the Brazilian comrades over this, I think, is very crucial to make the case of what exactly is happening. Thanks, comrades.
Thanks, Nikos. Anybody else want to say anything? Shall we return again to Marcio? Nobody else wants to make any comments or ask any further questions? No? Okay. Marcio, do you want to come back in?
Oh, thank you. Yes, actually, I think that it was a very good discussion, and it raised a lot of points. Of course, in 1 hour, 2 hours, is a very complex theme, and a very complex topic. It should be analyzed within the wider framework of the far right and the center left governments around, as Nigel said about the Labour Party situation. We are about to have a center left party with very right wing economic policies in the UK, right? We hope that is going to happen this year with the summer government and so on, and will be something like that as well. But I think that is currently nowadays we have one of the main divisors in the left is, okay, how do you deal with class coalition governments? Because we are seeing that at one point of the current reality, as Nikos mentioned. One point of that is the rise of these far right groups with different specificities, country by country, group by group. Some of them are more in the liberal speech, as Milei in Argentina. Other of them has more classical fascism. Let's say fascism propaganda, or like Meloni in Italy, even she's not going exactly, she may not go exactly in that direction. Bolsonaro in Brazil, Trump, the National Front in France, and so on. But there's a pattern about the far right. But another point that's happening is with the instability that's all around the world, the economical and social instability is possible. It's very possible that we have in many countries in different times class coalition governments. We may have struggles, and the response of the bourgeoisie for that struggles may be supporting center-left governments with some of the leaders of that struggle to calm things down and apply their policies. And it can happen as well in different ways. And it's very important nowadays. And I would say that's ever been important and ever been a divisor, ever been a game changer in politics. But how left-wing organizations and socialist organizations behave to these governments. I believe we cannot be sectarians in terms of, oh, these are bourgeois governments like any other, and we want to put them down because Lula equals Bolsonaro, who equals Trump, who equals everyone. That will be a very sectarian approach, and that would not dialogue with anyone. And more than that, it would make us, it's a wrong policy to. But I believe we need to be careful to not go into the other side as well, to support those governments, to be part of those governments, to don't have at least the necessary class independence of those governments. Say, okay, if someone from the far right tries a coup against you, we'll be against, because we will defend democracy. But this government is not our government. Our government is a workers' government, because only a workers' government, a real workers' government, can implement these policies and put the program, this agenda, and this agenda is the only one who won't create space for the far right rise again. Because in Brazil, and all the analysts, it's not just us saying, but all the mainstream analysts, they are concerned that these budget laws that have been approved last year by Lula's government, they might impact the life of people and the public spending and the public cuts in the next 1 or 2 years. So what's going to happen when the ordinary people in Brazil, who's expecting a lot from Lula government, starts to see that again, there's no money for schools, there's no money for public hospitals, there's no money, and the inflation is high, and so on and so on and so on. Who is going to capitalize that despair? The far right is there. If not with Bolsonaro, if Bolsonaro is dead or is in prison, but that may be another one. There are other far right leaders or other far right candidates trying to displace Bolsonaro and be the far right leader in Brazil at the moment. There is no one. Bolsonaro is still the main one, but potentially can have others. And if the left is seen as the ones that are always hugged to Lula, always voting everything for Lula, being a part of the Lula government, and not independently saying, no, we need Lula because you promised this, and that. We need to do this, and that. And to do this, and that, you cannot have as a minister this person because he was from the previous far right government, or this person because he is the main producer of soy of Brazil, and he don't want to do this, and that. That's what we need to have, and that will be something very important. We see that in Argentina, for example. We've seen small organizations, but some left-wing organizations say, no, let's vote in the first round. Let's vote for the Peronists because to avoid Milei, to avoid the far right. That will be seen in the US in the way that sectors of the left, Eric, may reply to the threat of a new Trump government. It will be seen in Europe. It will be seen in the UK. I believe that will be seen everywhere, and that's the main point that we would have to discuss. The Brazilian lesson, more to understand what's going on in Brazil or Latin America, which that's important, very important, but I think it's part of how the left should behave in class coalition governments that will be part of the new normal as well, with a far right opposition just around the corner. I think that's the main point. And thank you for inviting me. I really liked the conversation. Hope that we can have others again. More than happy to.
Really good having you along, Marcio. We have a bit more time if anybody else wants to ask any more questions. If not, did you want to make any closing comments, Marcio, or have you done it basically? You seem to have done it, yeah.
I think that's all from my side at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's been a really, really good and a really comprehensive discussion. And it's really good. Thanks, Marcio, for leading.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you,
for everybody
everyone.
for your contributions. Just before we go, normally we bring Roger in at this point about next week's meeting, but Roger is actually in Milan. Next week we are discussing Northern Ireland, and Kieran is leading off. Now, whether Kieran, you want to say something brief now about next week, or you'll want to leave us to wait till next week, I'll leave it with you.
Well, I don't need to say a lot, but maybe comrades will be aware that the power-sharing executive returned in Northern Ireland 2 weeks ago after a 2-year period when there was no functioning local government. That's an important historic point, especially now that Sinn Féin hold the First Minister position. That's important, but equally important, more important in our eyes, is the January the 18th public sector strike, which is probably the largest ever strike in Northern Ireland. There may be one or two historic examples that come close. So you have the workers' movement taking forward steps at the same time as the return of the sectarian parties to power. So I think there's quite a lot to discuss, and that's the ground I'll be covering next week, and looking forward, perspectives for the next period, the next 6 months, 1 to 2 years.
That's great. Thanks very much, Kieran. So hopefully you'll all be along next week. The notification will get sent out in the week, but we're still on the same Zoom link at the moment, so it will be the same link as this week. So thank you all for your attendance, and I declare the meeting closed.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.